Can we demonstrate DUI is not a crime?
But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka.
Man, Jim, I got hit by a guy who was driving without a license on company business and didn't have a green card and had a blood alcohol level that was falling down when he's tried to run away from the accident. So this story means something to me.
I'm sorry that happened. I really am. So we are going to demonstrate controversially that drunk driving is not a crime. And before we're done with this episode, I'm going to share with you a personal story that shows you that I have skin in the game. But before I get to that, let's just talk about this issue. We're provoked to do this, and we'll get into the details in a moment, because Reason has this headline: will cutting the blood alcohol limit to 0.05 really make our roads safer?
I think it's what, 0.08 now?
0.08, 0.08 to point. I think it was originally 0.10 or 0.1, right?
0.1.
Yeah. So I don't know. They are talking about moving it down and whether or not that'll make things safer. And most discussions about the way things should work in this country are done on what's called a pragmatic policy basis. We have studies and research, and we compare one place to another, and we see what the differences between policies are. And then we try to design the ideal policy. And I'm not a big fan of this. As you know, this show's sponsored by the Zero Aggression Project. We believe in the zero aggression principle. So I tend to come at things, zeroaggressionproject.org, by the way. I tend to come at things more from a principle basis. And I tend to think more heuristically. Now, in the end, I believe that doing the right thing leads to the best result. Notice I didn't say the right result. I don't know if right is ever actually possible. Like, there's no perfection that's possible in these matters.
Right. We're doing our best, right?
We're doing our best, right? We're trying to get the best outcome. And the best outcome, I believe, is obtained by taking into account all the factors and by following principles. Okay?
Sure.
So I think it's a big deal to suggest that drunk driving is not a crime. I think it's a controversial statement, obviously, but I think to make the suggestion is also a big deal, because we tend to think, okay, well, they're doing something really, really dangerous and putting other people in danger. So how can that not be a crime? So can we just discuss what a crime is for a moment?
Sure, yeah, because this is something that, I have a tough time with this one.
Okay, I do too, and we're going to get to my story. You're going to find out. I got skin in the game here, but where I'm at right now is crime means that there was a victim. You can identify the victim. That victim is owed damages. Okay, if those two things are not present, you don't have a crime.
So I have to separate in my mind now. So I've got the drunk driver who has a collision.
But we haven't got to the collision yet.
Right. But
all they're doing is driving.
That's a separate issue from what you just want to say. Someone is able to drive safely while intoxicated.
If they
don't hit anything, they don't have any accidents.
So every time you get on the road, as George Carlin would say, the objective is that your big metal thing doesn't change the shape of any of the other big metal things on the road. Right? That's the goal. Like,
sure.
You maneuver through all of it, and every driver takes some degree of chance. You make a left-hand turn. Left-hand turns are actually potentially very dangerous. Like, if we said, in fact, I would hazard a guess that if we compare the number of left-hand turn accidents to the number of drunk driving accidents, we would probably find that the left-hand turn accidents are every bit as dangerous. Right? Somebody goes speeding through an intersection, right? Okay, so we're all trying to get from one place to another, and we hope when we arrive that none of us have, I don't understand road rage anymore. I've talked about this before. Road rage means you've lost your temper about something that didn't happen in many cases. Like if somebody, I don't want to meet the other people I'm driving down the freeway with. I don't want to know their names. I don't want to know their live. I don't want to have any relationship with any of those other people. I want to get from one place to the other. I have an objective that I'm trying to travel and get there. I am not looking to make social connections on the freeway. Okay? Or on the highways or even on side roads. I'm just not looking for that. I'm driving because I want to get someplace. Okay. So crime requires an identifiable victim, and we can actually remedy some portion of their victimization through compensation. Those are the criteria that we have for a crime. No victim, no crime. So if somebody's maneuvering, they're driving kind of, they haven't actually committed a crime. Now you say, wait a minute. What about the fact that the law says that? Well, I'm suggesting to you that people make laws all the time for things that are not crimes. And that is why our state is so big and so onerous and so expensive and so inefficient and so bloated and so capricious and so corrupt, because people think that they can make anything that they want a law. But true law, dealing with crime, deals with a victim. So if you're not a victim, you can't claim to be a victim of somebody who's driving drunk. Even if you're on the same road with them, if they didn't hit you, you're not the victim. Ergo, no crime was committed against you.
I'm with you on this. I understand now.
Okay.
It might be splitting hairs, but if you're listening to this,
split them with me.
Split them with us, and let's see where the conversation goes.
But you go ahead and split them with me. Where can we split the hairs?
Well, on this one, I don't think that it's not really hair splitting to say that until there's a victim, there's no crime.
Okay,
that's a pretty blanket statement to say. And there's a lot of people who are going to go, no. So let's continue down this road and make the point.
Let's do one of those. Okay. So one of the things that I did not say just now is that there wouldn't potentially be a role for people that we presently call law enforcement. Highway patrol might be a better term, right? For patrol officers who are policing the streets to take a vehicle off the road and a driver and put them in a tank until they're cleaned up, until they're sober again.
Yeah, that would be like along the whole reckless driving sort of laws that exist.
Okay, so I don't watch a lot of episodes of it, but Andy Griffith, to me, is the model for what a sheriff should be, right? So Andy had I don't even remember the town drunk's name. What was the drunk's name?
I can't remember either. I love that show.
So they would put him in the tank, and they would just wait for him to get, a bit more sober.
To dry out, right?
Yeah, dry out. And then they would let him out. But Andy didn't charge him with a crime. Andy just took him off the streets until he was no longer a danger to others and, let me just say, to himself.
Yeah. Public safety.
And then as soon as the safety issue was resolved, meaning the person now had control of their faculties, he'd say, hey, try to avoid coming back here again. And he let him back out. So I do believe that if somebody is driving in a way that's reckless and dangerous, if they are of a certain blood alcohol content, you can say, you're done driving for today. You're not going to be driving anymore. We've pulled you over. We're towing your car at your own expense. And we may actually be taking you in until you clean up. We want to make sure you're off the streets.
Okay,
you can do that.
I'm with you.
But now to go and say, okay, we're going to take you to court. We're going to take these other steps. I don't believe that's within the state's purview.
Okay, this is clear to me, or clearer to me now.
Okay. That doesn't mean that I don't believe that. Well, let me say up front, I don't drink. Like I'm not opposed to drinking. I might have a little sip of something during a toast at a wedding, at a holiday family gathering. I might have a single drink. But I've never been drunk in my life. I've never been high on marijuana or heroin or cocaine or any of the other stuff that people consume recreational and party wise. Because of this experience I'm going to share with you in a few minutes, it was profoundly obvious to me that losing control of oneself was not good, and it holds no attraction for me. But I don't think it's immoral to do those things. I want to be clear. I mean, in fact, we've just done a couple episodes where we've talked about mushrooms and other types of, experiences that people can have.
Yeah.
I may want to do that at some point. I've given it serious thought, but I'm sitting here now at my age in the unique position of never having done that, because I know that that's unique. I know that's not the majority position. I've never done any of those things. So that means I've never driven that way, and I would never drive that way. And I think driving that way, to be very, very clear, is wrong. In fact, I believe it's immoral. I believe you're putting other lives at risk in a way that you should not. And it's offensive even. But criminal and offensive are not the same thing. We get into this trouble all the time because we keep trying to take things we don't like, that don't belong in our aesthetic, and then we say, well, we can criminalize this behavior.
Sure.
Okay, so the issue that I'm describing here is not altogether different from a debate we just got through having in this country over whether or not you had to have a certain product injected into your body before you were allowed to return to polite society, or whether or not you needed to put a covering over your face before you were allowed to go out in public. It's not a lot different. Because what people will tell me in this particular situation is, Jim, you're all wet because the action is endangering of others.
Well, possibly.
Yes.
But it's not until it happens, right?
Not until it happens, number one. And number two, I'm not foreclosing the idea that whoever owns or operates the roads, which in our case happens to be the state.
Happens to be the state.
I don't want it to be that way, but whoever owns and operates the roads would say, you are done driving for today, and you're going to come sit with us for a little while until you clean up.
Yeah.
And I think that's objective and fair and considerate, empathetic of all the parties involved. I don't think it's mean. I don't think it's coercion. I don't think it's cruelty of any kind to say, you know what, your driving day is done. And by the way, a tow company's going to come and you're going to owe them some money.
So our conversation here takes place in that slice of time between when a person who's intoxicated gets behind the wheel and when they are able to arrive safely wherever they're going. It
does, but I also talked about the time before, because I don't do this and I think it's wrong to do it. So I have a friend that we went out when we were in college, and we got in a fight in the street in front of my house that night because I didn't want him driving home. I took his keys from him. Literally a physical fight. Now, I didn't get hurt because he was too drunk
to actually do anything. Yeah,
to actually do anything to me. But I fought for the keys and I got them. And so I'm suggesting that you should, if you have a friend who is about to do this, you should stop them.
Yes.
And the heightened awareness that we've had over the since 1979, which is basically the creation of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Since 1979, the heightened awareness that we've had about this issue has led to a series of conversations and people believing that their job is to be the designated driver. So I have been the designated driver. I've done that several times in my life. I've even had people throw up in my car. It's disgusting, right? But better that happen than that they get behind the wheel, right?
Yes. So
people can go out and party, and I'm giving zero condemnation of that. You know, if it was good enough for Jesus to go to parties and hang out with people who are drinking, and if his very first miracle is turning water into wine, far be it for me to sit and judge what it is that they've chosen to do. Okay? And even the book of Proverbs doesn't suggest that it is absolutely wrong for somebody to drink. Somebody drowns their sorrows. Or they just want to be in an altered state for a little while. I'm not speaking to that at all. Getting behind the wheel is wrong. It's dangerous. And by virtue of that, it's immoral. And you can be pulled over and taken off the road, but it is not a crime until someone actually becomes a victim of that driver. And then all of a sudden the situation changes radically. Now we got some serious stuff going on.
Okay, so Reason article, state of Utah has decided to lower the blood alcohol limit, and they're getting some blowback because it didn't help. Things got worse.
Yeah, so what's happening here on the national level and in a lot of media sources, because the media doesn't really do its homework. is that they're telling a story about the very first year of this, where there was an anomaly in the data. But if you look at this longitudinally, if you go, the 3 or 4 years that have now been passed since this became the law, it turns out there's no appreciable difference in the death count. There's years actually since that have been higher. So this did not actually make the roads safer. They did this in 2018. And then they did a study and basically said, well, 2019 drunk driving deaths went down. Okay.
Yep.
But it hasn't been down since. So let me see if I can find the first dip here.
So what were they expecting? A continuous slope down to zero?
Well, so from 2016 to 18, which are the years immediately previous to the passage of the law,
right?
The average drunk driving death per year was 33. But the dip that happened in 2019 didn't last. There was 48 in 2020. I'm quoting from this article by C. Jarrett Dieterle in Reason. We'll put the link down in the show description. 48 in 2020, 61 in 21, and 22 had a record 69. So actually, the death count went up due to DUIs. Now, I don't. The data is still narrow, but the fact that there is a repeated claim that we need to change all of this on every road. Okay, so now I want you to imagine a scenario where you're going out with friends. This could hit home really quick, and you go to dinner and you have a beer. And then at the end of the beer, you toast with a friend, and maybe you have a wine with your dessert, or maybe you take a shot or whatever. You're just kind of having a good time, right? But you didn't go crazy. You didn't really get drunk. And you let us some time go by, maybe even drank some coffee when you were finishing up dessert. And now you get out on the road. It is so easy to blow a 0.05. It is incredibly easy for that to happen. And so people who are not drunk, who maybe had one drink with dinner, in some cases may find themselves in a situation. And you say, well, you shouldn't have had the drink if you were going to drive. But come on, we're all adults here. And there's various degrees of impairment that occur with phones, that occur with just being tired. Like most people, most of the time, have that objective in mind. They want to get their big metal thing into their own garage without hitting any other big metal things. And I think this will artificially increase the number of people who experience criminal penalties and difficulties throughout their life for one night of blowing a 0.05. Where they were.
So you're saying the punishment really doesn't, no danger. Punishment doesn't fit the alleged crime.
Well, see, here's what happens. So Mothers Against Drunk Driving comes along in 1979. It's created by a tragedy. The creator of M.A.D. has a family member who is killed by a drunk driver, goes on a crusade. Now, there are two things that should be said about every crusade. Number one, there's always a cultural component. That cultural component is where the hearts and minds are awakened and changed. And being a voluntarist, I believe in this. Like, I steadfastly believe in this. I believe that regardless of where you come from in life, you have the power, the right, as a human being, to state your claim. You could say, I'm on this side of the issue, and this is how I believe everybody should behave, and I'm going to go on a campaign to persuade enough other people to agree with me to move the society and get them to care about my issue. And I don't care whether you're progressive or conservative, you have that right. Your value system, you have every right to express it. And you should, if you want to create social change, take that step. But here's part two. Almost always, they are reaching for the political. They want to use coercion to speed their direction to their goal. It's a shortcut. Like, we'll get some people going, but what we really want to do is get them to put a lot of pressure on the lawmakers, and then we can change the law. Or what we want to do is we want to lean on regulators, and we want to see if we can get them to kind of interpret the law in a way we would prefer. And then our moral crusade won't have to persuade as many people. It'll be much more cost effective. We'll get to the goal much sooner. But they do this through force.
Yep.
And the main thing I want to point out is the cultural always precedes the political. not the other way around. We don't change laws and then the culture changes. That's rarely the case. There has to be enough cultural energy, enough of it, sufficient to change the law. Why not just go the one step further and get everybody on board? Why do we have to use force to get it done? I maintain that you don't have any right to be safe from drunk drivers. None. Because if they get behind the car and they hit you, now you have rights for how that gets settled, because now we're going to go into an environment where rights exist called courts. But in the real world, the way it works is you don't want anybody to hit you in the first place. So you hope that they are convicted culturally not to get behind the wheel. You hope that they're convicted ethically, spiritually, morally. That's where you hope their conviction lies. And they don't do that thing because they recognize that's a bad thing. And they simply just don't do it. If you're appealing to the law, you've gotten there too late. Something's already wrong.
Yeah.
I want to come back to that dinner table where you and I are going out to dinner, right? And you have a drink and then you get in the car and go home. And we had a nice time. I would even be able to testify in open court. He was completely clear-headed, rational, had his faculties, was behaving as I recognize Bill to be, right? He wasn't inebriated. He wasn't out of control in any way. And one drink is suddenly maybe a problem. Now, if you're a bigger person, maybe it doesn't bother you as much. I don't know how all this
Sure, we got to take,
right?
body mass and metabolism. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there.
Yeah. But 0.05. So the reason there's a 0.05 drive is that when the organization like M.A.D. is successful in getting the blood alcohol limit, they got it to 0.1 first, then they got it down to 0.08, right? Where do they go? What's their purpose? What's their cause celeb? Do they go home and say, well, we solved our mission, we did the thing? No, there's a payroll now.
Yeah, there's no end to this.
No. So now they're driving for 0.05. And so I'm suggesting this is a bad idea, that the evidence in Utah, I want to alert everybody that the evidence from Utah is not what the media is reporting to you that it is, that I don't want this federalized, even if you believe that drunk driving should be a crime. Many people could still agree with me that this should be a state-by-state issue. Just because Utah did it doesn't mean the nation needs to.
Are there parallels to the whole abortion thing right now?
Yes, 100%. You cannot. Criminal law is the purview of in our system is the purview of the states, not the federal government. We have over-federalized and turned a lot of things into crimes. And as a result of doing that, we have the largest prison population in the free world per capita. This is the least free nation on the planet. I know it's a shocking thing to hear, but we put a lot of people in prison. And then once we start criminalizing everything, we ruin people's lives. We take away opportunity that they have to go forward and make their lives better.
Yep.
See, if you get pulled over, that could be a wake-up call. If you get pulled over and it's like, oh, I was a bit out of control and they put me in the tank for the night, you got some inconvenience there. You didn't get home that night. You're a little embarrassed. You got you had to go pay to get your car for the tow and the impound, right? And you got your vehicle back. And now you're kind of looking at your life going, whoa, that could have gone really bad. Like maybe there's a wake-up call that occurs there. Because one of the other things that they cover in this article is the number of people who reoccur, what are called repeat offenders.
Yes.
So it turns out that there's only a small handful of DUI people, 30%, that get pulled over. They are repeat offenders. And only 10% that had 2 or more arrests for it.
And they can track that by, like in California, you get it on your record. Your driving record contains the DUI hit.
Okay.
So you know that.
But what's interesting about those people is they clocked in at levels that were extremely higher.
Like tons higher, not
like
0.06, but
like 3 times higher.
Yeah.
Than this new proposed limit.
Yeah.
So what you are going to do is not get the casual dinner drinker is not the criminal element who is going to be causing the massive problem. But M.A.D. can't stop. They can't stop because their organizational survival depends on continuing to push the ball forward.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Okay.
And they're pushing the wrong way, though. They could be educating. Instead, they're just pushing for more and more coercion.
Yes. And I'm saying, listen, don't believe the headlines, number one, because they're not giving you the full statistical picture. They're leaving out significant data because if we picked the most recent year, it turns out, in fact, 2 of the 3 most recent years, it turns out that the number is significantly higher. So it hasn't, if you wanted to just pick one year, you could argue it hasn't worked at all. It's had the reverse effect.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing that. I don't believe that this is how you make policy. I have a moral position that I took. It's a logically consistent position. And this is how I work through issues. And it doesn't give us an ideal result because it doesn't eliminate the deaths. It gives us a best result. And it turns out that it puts more emphasis on the cultural part, the part where we persuade each other and we build up a discussion and a sense of ethics about these things that says, I won't even get behind the wheel in the first place. And that is literally the best solution.
So do we have any stats or way to measure whether or not that best solution is working?
No, because we have a regime of coercion that has steadily increased.
So how do we get to the place?
I will say that in 1979, where Mothers and Drunks Driving comes onto the scene, drunk driving was not considered an immoral thing. In fact, it was frequently the subject of humor. If you go back into 1960s, 70s humor, there are comedians, there are acts, Foster Brooks, Dean Martin. These guys were drunk all the time, supposedly, right? This was part of the shtick that they did. It's not true. In fact, Foster Brooks' presentation, the way that he pulls that off, actually requires probably stone cold soberness to do it correctly, right? He has to play the drunk. And this was something that people did, and being drunk was part of the humor of the time. You notice that's gone away. Like the moral sensitivities about comedy change over time because culture changes over time. And so people found out in the 1980s, thanks to Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that this isn't funny, that it's actually potentially very serious. And so we had to have a cultural conversation about this. That cultural conversation went on throughout the entire decade of the 80s and into the 90s. But by the time we get to the 90s, it's pretty well settled that this is not something that we in the US culture, people who have been born and raised here, we all recognize this is a bad thing to do.
So when are we going to stop outsourcing our cultural inadequacies and our ethical inadequacies to the state?
Never. And I chose to address the DUI issue in part because A, the media is not telling the truth about it. And B, because I feel like this is a way I can really shake people to get them to understand it. Because like when I say this, even some of the most libertarian people I know go, whoa, wait a minute. They start making exceptions for this issue.
Yeah.
I'm like, no. Like if you're going to be consistent, this is the implications of it. And you notice, again, I'm at pains to say, I didn't say we can't take them off the road for the night. I didn't say that what they did was right or just, or that I'm very clear about my level of participation in it. But I want to close with a personal story. And I want to illustrate just how close to home this hits me. So 1979 is the founding of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And for my family, that's a year too late. On Mother's Day weekend, 1978, my family was in a car accident. There were 4 people in the car. My father was driving. My mother and sister were on the right side of the car. I was in the back seat on the left. I was 10 years old. We were struck broadside, 70 miles an hour, on a car that came through a stop sign on the intersection. And the car was elevated. It was off the ground as it hit the side of our car. Our car spun 2.5 times before it finished. And my sister ended up in the hospital. She was in first grade at the time. It's had permanent lifetime impact on her. She had a broken leg and a concussion. She was broken right across her thigh bone. So she was in traction as a first grader little girl. She was in traction for 5 weeks, a little more. She was in a cast for a little more than 4 weeks. It went from toe to hip. She couldn't get out of a bed. And then she spent some time in therapy. She missed basically the summer between her first and second grade. She didn't play like other children did. But the bigger tragedy of this moment was that my mother was killed. She didn't make it to the hospital that night. She died on the way due to severe internal injuries. I got out with only a scratch behind my ear. And the night, 10 years old, is vivid in my life. I could spend the next hour plus telling you stories from that night with a level of precision that is clear. I still live this. And you miss your mother when she's not there for your marriage, to see your children, to see how they turned out, to see how you turned out, that you turned out okay. That's how personal this issue is to me. Now, the day that this happened, the young man who struck me, Bill, or struck our family, was 16 years old, and he was leaving a party. So legally, no law would have stopped this from happening. He shouldn't have been drinking in the first place. But it's worse than that. Earlier that very same day, he'd been detained by police for attempting to steal alcohol from a store because it wasn't legal to purchase it. He was attempting to steal it.
Yeah.
And they let him go because his mother pleaded with the police. He's a good boy. It's a mistake. He's only 16. And the cops let him out. If the cops had held him, my mother would still be alive, or she would have been alive past that point. She'd be in her 80s now. I don't know if she'd be here yet, but she would have survived that Mother's Day weekend. We wouldn't have had that event. And I want to put a postscript on this story. The young man who hit us, his name was Jeff. Jeff was 16, charged with aggravated vehicular homicide. Because yes, he committed a crime. Jeff went to juvenile detention and spent the rest of his minor years there. And he was released, I think, when he was 19 years old. Now, I'm young enough then that I don't have all the precise details about that. That's not part of my life and memory. That's just basically a historical awareness. But several years ago, just a handful actually, maybe 5, I went looking to find out what happened to Jeff. And it turned out that Jeff died. Now, I'm 10, he's 16. There's only 6 years worth of difference. So you can start to do the math. Jeff died in his 50s. And from what little I could pick up about him historically, because he had kids, his life was difficult. His life was hard. I suspect that the level of guilt and anguish that he felt over what happened that night was overwhelming to him. I didn't always have the attitude that I've got here today. When I was 19 years old and in college, one of the jobs that I had was working with painters. I learned how to paint, and I was working with men in the trade. And we were on a job in downtown Cleveland, and a guy named Jeff arrived on the job. And Jeff began having a conversation with a guy, another friend of mine, a guy that I stayed friends with till he passed away, named Pat. And detail by detail, I began to decipher that this might be the man that drove that car. Now, I'm 19 years old at the time, and the way I'd been raised, vengeance, I'm thinking a little bit of like, I wanted to beat him. I wanted to take a poll. And so I asked Pat to go in and confirm, is this that guy? I gave him the first and last name, described what year he would have likely graduated from high school, what school he went to. Because school had already come up. That's part of how I knew it. And I'm persuaded that it was him because Pat came back in for my benefit and lied to me. As a friend, he lied to me because he realized how upset I was. And I never saw Jeff again. I didn't even see Jeff that day. Jeff left the building and never came back to the job. So I believe I met him. And I was in a complete rage at the time. I wasn't practicing the grace that you're seeing right now. There was no forgiveness in play. This is an event that only occurred for me 9 years previous. And I was really outraged.
Understandably.
I suspect Jeff paid a huge price for what happened. I know my sister did. I know it's been tough in a lot of ways. And I feel a strong sense of loss. So when someone comes along and wants to tell me the story about, well, I lost a family member or whatever, you can't top my story. I'm sorry. You can't, because this is my mother we're talking about, and I'm 10. It's freaking Mother's Day weekend, for crying out loud. We didn't go to church that Sunday. I remember my dad looking at me with tears in his eyes asking if I wanted to go. Nope. And Mother's Day was the hardest Sunday to go to church when I was a church attender, because they always made a big deal about the mothers, as they should. Sitting through it, couldn't do it. They would do this poem at one of the church I went every single year. And after like 2 years of this, I'm like, no way I'm going back. Called I Love You Forever. So I'm sitting here to say, I chose the issue that goes right into the teeth. It's one of the most difficult issues for someone to apply forgiveness and grace. It's one of the most difficult issues to recognize the state should not be involved at the level that it is. And I'm speaking to you from the heart and saying it is possible that we could have a better place if we relied on trying to persuade people of what is right. In fact, if we exercised that cultural muscle and learned how to have real conversations about what is good, absent the coercion, it would even be possible that these conversations could be had in socially acceptable tones. It's the fact that people are trying to impose their values on others that reduces the social harmony, which is predicted by a principle called the principle of human respect, that anytime we use coercion and force to get things done, we use violence, threats of violence to get things done, which is what jail and criminalization is. We reduce the happiness, harmony, and prosperity. That harmony declines. And I am speaking out. I'm choosing the toughest issue to do it with. And I'm doing it from a place where I've experienced the pain of getting it wrong. So let's focus on how we can win people's hearts so that they would never, ever want to get behind the wheel when they're not in a good state. But let's not pretend that we're getting something done by taking the casual social drinker at dinner and turning them into criminals too.